The Veloxians had established their dominance across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy long before humans ever achieved faster-than-light travel. They were the undisputed apex predators of known space, a position they had maintained through biological superiority rather than technological advancement. Evolution had blessed them with reaction speeds that defied belief. Their neural pathways transmitted signals at rates that would make Earth's fastest supercomputers seem glacial by comparison. Their muscular system could generate explosive power that allowed them to cross 30 meters in under a second, and their sensory apparatus could track the movement of individual dust particles in a windstorm. These physical gifts had made the Veloxians virtually undefeatable in personal combat. Their empire had expanded through conquest rather than diplomacy. Their battle doctrine simple, yet devastatingly effective. Strike first, strike fast, and leave no survivors capable of mounting a counterattack. Why develop complex military strategy when your natural abilities allowed you to eliminate any threat before it could properly react? Supreme Commander Toxiv stood at the observation deck of the Imperial flagship Inevitable Conquest, his slender, sinewy form a testament to his species' evolutionary perfection. His scaled skin shimmered with iridescent patterns, the mark of a Veloxian in their prime. For eyes, positioned to provide nearly 270-degree vision, scanned the holographic display of recently charted territories. Another species requesting diplomatic recognition, he said, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his kind. These humans. Strategic advisor Velex approached, her movements a blur to any non-Veloxian observer. The third this cycle. They appear unremarkable by every measure. Their ships are slow, their weapons unimpressive, and their physical forms. She paused, searching for the right word. Soft, elaborate, commanded Toxiv. They evolved on a world with moderate gravity and atmosphere pressure. Endothermic mammals with no natural armor, no specialized hunting appendages, and reaction times that would embarrass a hatchling. Their only notable attribute seems to be their endurance. They can maintain activity for extended periods without rest. Toxiv made a dismissive gesture. Endurance is the compensation of prey species. When you cannot win through strength or speed, you survive through persistence. He flicked a claw against the display, zooming in on the human diplomatic vessel. What do they want? Standard first contact protocols, trade agreements, cultural exchange, mutual non-aggression pacts. Their technological level is mid-tier, advanced enough for interstellar travel, but unremarkable otherwise. Very well. Grant them provisional status. Assign them the usual restrictive trade corridors and limited colonization rights. Have intelligence begin standard infiltration procedures. Toxiv turned away from the display. They may prove useful as a buffer species between us and the Krell Dominion. There is one curiosity, Velex added. Their historical records indicate an unusual propensity for intraspecies conflict. They fought more wars against themselves than most species fight against external threats. That merely confirms their status as prey, Toxiv replied. When you cannot compete against true predators, you turn on your own kind. Perhaps, though there are mentions of specialized combat units that warrant further study. One designation in particular appears frequently in their martial histories, Marines. Toxiv's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Veloxian equivalent of derisive laughter. Study them if you wish, but don't waste valuable resources. These humans will find their proper place in the galactic hierarchy, as all species eventually do. Whether they come to understand this through diplomacy or demonstration is entirely up to them. As the Supreme Commander departed, Velex returned her attention to the human files. Something about this species triggered an instinct she couldn't quite identify. Not a warning of danger, exactly, but a sense that there was more beneath the surface than initially apparent. These humans had evolved on a death world by galactic standards, a planet with extreme temperature variations, powerful atmospheric disturbances, and aggressive megafauna. Most species that developed sentience did so on worlds far more forgiving. She made a note to assign additional resources to human observation, then filed it away as a low priority. After all, what could a species of slow, soft prey possibly do to challenge the dominance of the galaxy's supreme predators? The diplomatic relations proceeded precisely as expected. Human representatives were appropriately deferential, seemingly grateful for the limited concessions granted by the Valachian Empire. They established trading outposts along the prescribed corridors, engaging primarily in commerce involving cultural artifacts and raw materials of minimal strategic value. 3 standard cycles passed without incident, confirming the Empire's assessment of humans as a non-threatening species content with their assigned position in the galactic hierarchy. If anything, the initial evaluation had overestimated their potential. Their military vessels, when observed, moved with a plodding predictability that Valachian tacticians found almost insulting. Their weapons systems seemed designed for defensive action rather than conquest. The first joint expedition was approved more out of bureaucratic routine than strategic interest. A survey mission to Tarsus IV, a mineral-rich planet in a disputed border region. The planet presented significant challenges: crushing gravity, extreme temperature fluctuations, and atmospheric conditions that required specialized equipment for most species to survive on the surface. The Valachian contingent, led by Field Commander Zyvex, included 20 elite warriors, more than sufficient for security on an uninhabited world. The human team consisted of 15 scientists, engineers, and a small security detail of 5 individuals designated as Marines. The term triggered a faint memory in Zyvex's mind, something from initial intelligence briefings about specialized human combat units, but he dismissed it as irrelevant. 5 soft, slow humans posed no security concern whatsoever. Upon landing, the Valachians immediately demonstrated their superiority, covering ground at incredible speed as they established a perimeter around the landing site. The humans methodically unloaded their equipment, setting up environmental shelters and scientific stations with practiced precision. Zyvex noted their inefficient movements with disdain. "Your species moves as though underwater," he commented to the human expedition leader, a scientist named Catherine Murray. She smiled, a facial expression Zyvex had learned indicated amusement or goodwill among humans. "We each have our own pace, Commander. Tarsus IV will still be here tomorrow." "Inefficiency is a luxury prey cannot afford," Zyvex replied, then blurred away to supervise his warriors, missing the thoughtful look that passed between Murray and the Marine sergeant. The first 3 days proceeded according to plan. The Valachians patrolled the perimeter in lightning-fast circuits, while the humans methodically conducted their surveys and analysis. Zyvex noted with interest that the Marines maintained a constant rotation, with at least 3 on duty at all times despite the punishing environmental conditions. They moved slowly but unceasingly, never appearing to fatigue in the way the scientists did. On the 4th day, disaster struck. A massive seismic event, far beyond what preliminary surveys had indicated was possible, tore through the region. The Valachian camp, constructed with their typical emphasis on lightweight materials that wouldn't impede movement, collapsed immediately. The human environmental shelters, built with redundant support systems, remained largely intact. Zyvex rallied his warriors, using their superior speed to rescue trapped personnel. For the first hour, the Valachians dominated the emergency response, their blinding movements saving several lives. But as the crisis extended into its second, then 3rd hour, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Valachians, evolutionary sprinters, began to tire. Their movements, while still faster than any human, lost their initial explosive power. Meanwhile, the Marines maintained a steady, relentless pace of rescue operations, rotating positions with mechanical precision to prevent exhaustion. When a secondary tremor triggered a rock slide that cut off the primary evacuation route, Zyvex was forced to admit a tactical failure. His warriors, despite their speed, could not sustain the necessary effort to clear a new path while continuing search and rescue operations. It was the Marine sergeant who approached him with an alternative plan. "Commander, we've identified a secondary route through the eastern ridge. My team can establish a secure evacuation corridor, while your warriors continue recovery operations. Zyvex bristled at the implied criticism, but recognized the logic. Proceed. But be warned, the eastern ridge is nearly 2 kilometers away through hazardous terrain. By the time your team reaches it, we may have already found another solution. The sergeant simply nodded and departed with 3 Marines, leaving one to coordinate with the Veloxian team. What followed confounded Zyvex's understanding of human capabilities. The Marine team moved through the punishing landscape at a pace that never varied, not sprinting like Veloxians, but advancing with a methodical inevitability that somehow covered ground with surprising efficiency. They carried equipment that should have slowed them significantly, yet they maintained formation and momentum regardless of obstacles. 6 hours later, as Zyvex's team was reaching the limits of their endurance, the Marines had established a secure evacuation route complete with guide markers, emergency shelters, and mechanical assist for the most difficult terrain. They had rotated positions throughout, ensuring no individual reached exhaustion, maintaining communication discipline that Zyvex found uncomfortably reminiscent of professional military operations, not the ad hoc security he had expected from a scientific expedition. The evacuation succeeded with no loss of life. In his official report, Zyvex acknowledged the humans' contribution while emphasizing the critical role his warriors had played in the initial response. He attributed the Marines' performance to their species' unusual endurance and the specialized environmental equipment they had brought. There was no mention of tactical sophistication or superior preparation. Such concepts were incompatible with the established understanding of humans as a prey species. In the privacy of his quarters, however, Zyvex reviewed the mission recordings with growing unease. The Marines' movements had not been random or instinctive. They had demonstrated coordination that spoke of extensive training. Their equipment, which he had initially dismissed as compensatory technology for a physically inferior species, now seemed suspiciously well adapted to the specific challenges of Tarsus IV. Most disturbing was their apparent psychological resilience. At no point had any of them shown signs of fear or uncertainty, even when facing conditions that had tested veteran Veloxian warriors. Zyvex appended a confidential note to his report, recommending closer observation of human military units, particularly those designated as Marines. He classified this recommendation as low priority, a routine security precaution rather than an expression of concern. After all, acknowledging that humans might represent any form of threat would be tantamount to questioning the natural order of the galaxy. His report was noted, filed, and largely forgotten as the Veloxian Empire turned its attention to more pressing matters. Specifically, the rich resources of the Sigma 7 asteroid belt recently discovered in a sector adjacent to human expansion territory. Initial surveys indicated concentrations of rare elements crucial for advanced propulsion systems, and the Imperial High Command had already determined that full control of these resources would be more beneficial than the limited access that would result from honoring existing treaties with the humans. High Commander Xylox, tasked with securing the Sigma 7 resources, reviewed the intelligence briefings with a casual confidence typical of his species. The asteroid belt contained a single human mining outpost, a small operation with approximately 50 personnel, including a security detail of 10 Marines. The outpost defenses were minimal. Point defense systems designed to protect against natural hazards like micrometeorites rather than military threats, and a handful of short-range patrol craft for maintenance and emergency response. This will be a simple demonstration of Imperial authority, Xylox informed his strike team commanders. We will secure the outpost with overwhelming speed, neutralize any resistance before it can organize, and present the humans with a fait accompli. Given their established behavior patterns, they will protest diplomatically but ultimately accept the new reality. Strategic advisor Kellix, who had been assigned to the operation from Imperial intelligence, offered a note of caution. The human security contingent consists entirely of Marines. Previous observation suggests they may be more capable than their physical limitations would indicate. Xylox's mandibles clicked rapidly. I've reviewed the Tarsus 4 incident. These Marines demonstrated nothing more than unusual endurance and adequate equipment. Against a coordinated strike by Valachian warriors, such attributes are meaningless. We will move too quickly for their endurance to become relevant. The plan was elegantly simple, emphasizing the Valachians' natural advantages. 3 assault craft would approach from different vectors, using the asteroid field for cover. Upon reaching optimal positioning, they would launch simultaneously, overwhelming the outpost's rudimentary tracking systems. Boarding teams would secure key locations before the humans could organize any meaningful response. The entire operation was projected to take less than 15 minutes from initiation to completion. Initially, everything proceeded according to plan. The assault craft reached their launch positions undetected, and the coordinated strike caught the outpost's external defenses unprepared. Valachian warriors breached the outer airlocks with practiced efficiency, their movements a blur as they raced toward command centers and critical infrastructure. The first indication that something was amiss came when Strike Team Alpha, assigned to secure the primary command center, reported unexpected resistance, not from defensive systems or hastily organized personnel, but from environmental countermeasures. Portions of the corridor had been deliberately depressurized, forcing the warriors to activate their environmental seals, which marginally reduced their movement speed. More concerning, the internal layout of the station appeared to differ from the intelligence schematics, with additional security bulkheads and compartmentalized sections that slowed the Valachians' advance. Strike Team Beta, targeting the communications hub, encountered more direct resistance. As they rounded a corner at attack speed, the lead warrior triggered a series of non-lethal countermeasures, localized gravity fluctuations that disrupted their momentum, followed by strobing lights calibrated to the specific frequency that interfered with Valachian optical processing. The effect lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, precisely placed shots from unseen defenders neutralized 2 warriors with targeted stun rounds. Most alarming was the report from Strike Team Gamma, tasked with securing the station's power core. They had encountered no resistance whatsoever, because the power core wasn't where intelligence had indicated. Instead, they found themselves in what appeared to be a deliberately constructed false target, moments before emergency bulkheads sealed, isolating them from the rest of the assault force. 15 minutes into what should have been a completed operation, High Commander Xylox faced the disturbing realization that his forces had secured less than 30% of the outpost. Worse, the humans had managed to transmit a message before the communications hub was finally captured. The contents of that message sent a chill through even Xylox's confident posture. Sigma, 7 outpost to UNSC command. Marine contingent engaging hostile forces. Request immediate MARSOC intervention. Hostile intent confirmed. Implementing Protocol Thunderbolt. Semper Fi. Xylox turned to Kellex, mandibles tight with suppressed anger. What is MARSOC? What is Protocol Thunderbolt? The strategic advisor's posture had changed, her usual fluid confidence replaced by a rigidity that indicated extreme concern. MARSOC is an acronym for Marine Special Operations Command. Our intelligence suggests it represents their most elite combat units. Protocol Thunderbolt is unknown, but appears to be a predetermined response strategy. It changes nothing, Xylox declared, though his tone lacked its earlier certainty. The outpost is isolated. Whatever response they're requesting would take days to arrive through conventional space. By then, we will have secured our objective and established defensive positions that no human assault could overcome. Commander, one of the communications officers interrupted, "We're detecting unusual energy signatures from the outer asteroid field. Multiple small craft on approach vectors that don't match known human vessel profiles. Time to intercept," Xylox demanded. At current velocity, 38 minutes. Impossible, Xylox thought. No human military response could have been mobilized so quickly, let alone traverse the distance from the nearest known base. "Show me," he ordered. The tactical display revealed a formation of 12 small craft, each barely large enough to transport a handful of personnel. They were navigating the dense asteroid field at velocities that should have been suicidal, using the gravitational interactions between asteroids to execute slingshot maneuvers that accelerated them far beyond what their propulsion systems should have allowed. Those aren't conventional craft, Kellix observed, professional analysis overriding her concern. They appear to be specialized insertion vehicles. Minimal life support, maximum thrust, designed for one-way high-speed deployment. Xylox processed this information against everything he knew about human capabilities. Intercept them before they reach the outpost. All available craft, maximum speed. But the order came too late. The human insertion vehicles didn't approach the main outpost as expected. Instead, they targeted the Veloxian assault craft, which had been left with minimal crew during the boarding operation. 3 insertion vehicles for each Veloxian craft, approaching for vectors that minimized the effectiveness of defensive systems. What followed was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The human craft made no attempt to match Veloxian speed in direct combat. Instead, they executed precisely calculated approaches that used the assault craft's own defensive fire patterns to create debris fields, then navigated these artificial obstacles with shocking precision. By the time they reached boarding range, the Veloxian defensive systems had created more hazards for themselves than they had eliminated. Inside the outpost, the tide had already begun to turn. The Marines who had been defending key positions suddenly shifted to offensive operations, moving with a coordination that suggested they were receiving real-time tactical updates. They didn't attempt to match Veloxian speed. Instead, they created channeling zones that forced the warriors into predictable movement patterns, then exploited those patterns with devastating effectiveness. When the MARSOC teams breached the Veloxian assault craft, they brought with them combat doctrines entirely foreign to Veloxian experience. They moved in perfect coordination, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, using specialized ammunition that expanded on impact to create temporary movement barriers and corridors. They deployed countermeasures that turned the Veloxians' sensory advantages into liabilities, compounds that overwhelmed their acute olfactory senses, acoustic devices tuned to frequencies that disrupted their neural processing. Most disturbing to Xylox, as he watched the tactical displays show more and more of his warriors neutralized, was the methodical nature of the human advance. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation, no fear. These weren't prey animals fighting desperately for survival. These were predators executing a meticulously planned hunt. 3 hours after the initial Veloxian assault, High Commander Xylox found himself in the humiliating position of considering surrender. His strike teams had been reduced to isolated pockets of resistance, cut off from each other and from Central Command. The humans had secured both the outpost and 2 of the 3 Veloxian assault craft, capturing rather than killing whenever possible, a psychological tactic that proved surprisingly effective against warriors who had never contemplated defeat, let alone captivity. With Imperial reinforcements days away and his tactical options exhausted, Xylox made the unprecedented decision to accept the human terms: immediate withdrawal of all remaining Veloxian forces, return of captured personnel, and formal acknowledgement of the treaty violation. The true damage, however, wasn't to the Imperial military. It was to the foundational Veloxian worldview. For the first time in recorded history, the apex predators of the galaxy had been systematically outmaneuvered and defeated, not by a technologically superior force or a numerically overwhelming one, but by a species they had dismissed as evolutionary inferiors. In the aftermath, Imperial intelligence conducted a comprehensive analysis of the Sigma-7 incident, seeking to understand how such a defeat had occurred. Their findings, classified at the highest levels, painted a disturbing picture of human military capabilities, particularly those of the Marines. The MARSOC teams hadn't relied on superior technology or physical abilities. Their advantage came from training so intensive it had literally rewired their neural pathways, creating reflexive responses that operated below the level of conscious thought. Their equipment, while not particularly advanced by galactic standards, had been refined through centuries of intraspecies conflict to maximize effectiveness under specific combat conditions. Most significantly, the analysis identified a fundamental difference in predatory psychology. Veloxians were ambush predators by evolution. Strike fast, kill quickly, move on. Humans, it appeared, had evolved from persistent hunters. Their ancestors had pursued prey not through superior speed, but through relentless tracking over extreme distances, literally running animals to exhaustion before moving in for the kill. This evolutionary history had created a species that approached warfare with a fundamentally different mindset. Where Veloxians sought the rapid overwhelm, humans, and Marines in particular, excelled at sustained pressure, tactical adaptation, and psychological warfare. They didn't need to be faster. They simply needed to ensure that every time a Veloxian moved, they were moving into a position of the Marines' choosing. The survivors of Sigma 7 reported experiences unlike any in Veloxian military history. Not simply defeat, but a profound sense of being outmatched at a cognitive level. Several described the uncanny feeling that the Marines had been able to predict their actions before they themselves had decided on them. Others spoke of the psychological impact of facing opponents who showed no fear, no anger, no emotion whatsoever. Only a machine-like efficiency that made their inevitable advance all the more terrifying. One captured officer, upon being returned to Imperial territory, provided testimony that would eventually become legendary in Veloxian military circles. They didn't defeat us through superior strength or speed. They defeated us by turning our own speed against us, by understanding our movements better than we understood theirs. I didn't feel like I was fighting animals. I felt like I was being solved, like a mathematical equation. They weren't faster, but they were always exactly where they needed to be, exactly when they needed to be there. And their eyes? No prey species has eyes like that. Those were the eyes of something that has evolved to hunt things that think they're the predator. The Sigma 7 incident marked a fundamental shift in galactic politics. The human diplomatic corps, suddenly negotiating from a position of demonstrated strength rather than presumed weakness, secured concessions that would have been unthinkable months earlier, expanded colonization rights, favorable trade terms, and formal recognition as a peer power rather than a client species. For their part, the Veloxians initiated the most comprehensive military reform in Imperial history. Training programs were established to develop sustained combat effectiveness rather than relying solely on explosive speed. Tactical doctrines were revised to account for adversaries who might employ psychological warfare and predictive engagement strategies. Most significantly, intelligence resources were redirected toward developing a deeper understanding of human military capabilities, particularly those of the Marines. What emerged was a picture far different from the initial assessment of humans as a prey species. Archaeological evidence suggested that even before achieving spaceflight, humans had waged wars of astonishing scale and complexity against themselves. Their military traditions have been forged not in conflicts between species, but in centuries of fighting opponents who thought exactly as they did, creating a constant evolutionary pressure towards psychological warfare and counterintelligence that most galactic species had never experienced. The Marines, it appeared, represented the distilled essence of this tradition. Not merely soldiers, but the product of selection processes and training regimens designed to create warriors who could operate effectively under any conditions, against any opponent, for extended periods with minimal support. Their capabilities weren't based on physical superiority, but on decision-making frameworks that allowed them to process tactical information and adapt strategies in real time. Most disturbing to the Imperial hierarchy was the realization that what they had encountered at Sigma 7 wasn't even the full extent of human military capability. The MARSOC teams had been a rapid response force, operating with minimal preparation and equipment. Intelligence suggested that fully prepared Marine expeditionary forces would be significantly more formidable. Combining the tactical sophistication demonstrated at Sigma 7 with heavy weapons platforms and integrated aerospace support. The implications rippled through Veloxian society. Species that had evolved as apex predators rarely developed robust cooperative behaviors. They hadn't needed to. Humans, evolving as mid-tier predators constantly threatened by larger carnivores, had developed complex social structures and cooperative hunting strategies out of necessity. This evolutionary history had created a species that excelled at coordinated action under pressure, able to subjugate individual impulses to collective objectives in ways Veloxians struggled to comprehend. 50 cycles after the Sigma-7 incident, a young Veloxian naval officer named Krivex found himself assigned to a joint training exercise with human forces. Like most of his generation, he had been raised on cautionary tales about human capabilities, but dismissed many of them as exaggerations born of a single historical defeat. The Veloxian Empire remained one of the dominant powers in the galaxy, after all, and humans were still physically inferior by every objective measure. During a reception before the exercise, Krivex found himself conversing with a group of fellow officers near a human Marine colonel. Flush with the confidence of youth and rank, he began recounting his recent victory in a training simulation, emphasizing the speed with which his squadron had overwhelmed the opposing force. No defense can react quickly enough when faced with true Veloxian speed, he boasted, loud enough to be heard by the nearby humans. It is simply a matter of evolutionary superiority. An older Veloxian commander, who had been listening with growing discomfort, cut him off with a sharp gesture. You would be wise to moderate both your volume and your confidence, Lieutenant, she said quietly, particularly in the presence of Marines. Krivex bristled at the rebuke. With respect, Commander, I'm simply stating biological fact. No human could. I serve on the analysis team for Sigma-7. The commander interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Trust me when I tell you that what these Marines lack in speed, they more than compensate for in other attributes. Attributes you have never encountered and cannot comprehend until you have faced them in actual combat, which I sincerely hope you never do. Something in her tone, a combination of hard-earned wisdom and genuine concern, gave Krivex pause. He glanced toward the human Marine colonel, who had given no indication of having heard their exchange, yet somehow conveyed the impression of missing nothing that occurred within his vicinity. What happened there? Krivex asked. The official accounts are heavily redacted. The commander's 4 eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him instinctively withdraw. What happened is that we learned the difference between being a predator and being a hunter. We evolved to strike quickly and overwhelm through speed. They evolved to think, plan, and coordinate in ways our species never needed to. At Sigma-7, their Marines didn't defeat our warriors by being faster. They defeated them by turning our own speed into a weapon against us. They knew exactly what we would do before we did it, because they had studied us, understood us, and prepared accordingly. She leaned closer, mandibles nearly touching his ear. When you complete this exercise, review the human historical records on persistence hunting. Then perhaps you will understand why, to this day, even a mention of their Marines triggers an instinctive fear response in those of us who know the truth. It isn't superstition, Lieutenant. It's evolutionary wisdom. When a creature has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of hunting predators, the predator that dismisses them as prey doesn't live long enough to correct its mistake. As if to punctuate her point, the Marine colonel chose that moment to glance in their direction. His eyes met Krivex's with a calm, evaluative gaze that contained neither aggression nor submission, merely assessment. In that instant, Krivex felt something he had never experienced before, a primal, instinctive uncertainty that resonated at a level below conscious thought. For the first time, he understood what his education had tried to convey through sterile tactical analyses and historical case studies. These humans, these Marines, didn't see Veloxians as superior beings to be feared or impressive predators to be respected. They saw them as problems to be solved, obstacles to be overcome, threats to be neutralized with the same methodical precision they would apply to any tactical challenge. And in that realization lay the root of the fear that now circulated through the Valachian collective unconscious. Not fear of defeat, but fear of being truly understood by a species that had made understanding its prey the cornerstone of its evolutionary success. The word Marines had become a mimetic trigger for this deeper recognition. That in the vast galactic hierarchy, true dominance belonged not to the fastest or the strongest, but to those who had mastered the patience, intelligence, and implacable will to hunt the hunters themselves.